Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to week 14. On this topic today, we're going to deal with the technology adoption lifecycle and the customer development process. I like bringing up the screen again and again so that we can see where we are in the program. We are still in the idea of validating customers. We've done the building of the MVP. Now we're in the process of validation of our MVPs. Today we just want to cover some certain things. We're just going to take a step back and cover the stages of the technology life cycle as it progresses. We want to also cover the lean startup stages. I shared with you guys the book by Steve Blank, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany. Don't worry about big English epiphany. It just means the great realization, okay? The penny drops, okay? So we're gonna get into this because this is the principles that of the lean startup that we've been following. And then right at the end, we're gonna talk about crossing the chasm of the drone industry. Whether you call it chasm or chasm, okay, I'll say chasm for now. Let's look at the stages of the technology life cycle, okay. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Gartner hype cycle. Every technology, whether it's drones, whether it's augmented reality, virtual reality, cell phones, any technology starts off here on the rise. It starts off as an innovation trigger, and then it moves, and then people write about it, and then early adopters investigate it, the mass media, people talk more about it, just like they talk about artificial intelligence. And then it reaches what we call the peak of inflated expectations, because people are saying, yeah, this technology, but what can it do? Drones were here at some point, okay? And then people become, it's like, for instance, the 4th Industrial Revolution. The past 2 years, there was a big hype around 4th Industrial Revolution, but I'm glad in 2020, we are sliding into what we call the trough of disillusionment. People are saying, yes, we know there's 4th Industrial Revolution, but what is it gonna do? Is it gonna put food on the table? But all these technologies, they bottom out. Some of them, they just die out. But technologies like, for instance, 3D printing and all of these, they are coming around into this trough of disillusionment. There was a time also for the drone industry when we were in this trough of disillusionment. But then it bottoms out. And when it bottoms out, then the technology turns the corner. And when it turns the corner, then you find it becomes more productive. But there's still less than 5% of the potential audience has adopted. There's early adoption here, and then it grows and grows. And then when it gets here, it's in full deployment. That's the technology. The drone industry, last year they produced this sketch. If you can see, for instance, how quickly the drones have progressed over the years. Not long ago, the drones were in the peak of inflated expectations. And just about 3 years ago, the drones were just coming out of the peak of inflated expectation, going down. This is when, for instance, there was talk about drones delivering your pizzas and all of that. But people are beginning to realize that it's probably not as, it's not as possible as people might want to think about, because things don't happen the way people expect them to happen. And then drones in the past 3 years, they bottom out in the trough of disillusionment. And sorry, I'm getting my, yeah. Drones bottomed out in the past 3 years, and we are now in what we call the slope of enlightenment. But we're not there yet. You know, we're still in the growth phase. We're still in the early adopter stage. We are not yet in the early majority. And we are still, particularly in South Africa, we're still yet to experience the drone adoption in a big way. Okay, let's look at the the life cycle of any product. And but for today, we're going to look at the technology adoption. Every product starts off with the innovators. Okay, these are the people who basically are not scared to start up anything new. They like trying anything new. Okay, and then but these people form about 2.5% of the total market. And then you got the early adopters. The early adopters, they're going to say, okay, these guys, for instance, the innovators, they may not use this technology within a productive environment where they are. But the early adopters might say, hey, let's start using, let's start testing this. But then you've got the guys who are sitting here in the early majority. Now, the early majority are very, very important, okay? Because the early majority, they don't care, they don't want your MVP. Whereas these guys are saying, yes, please let us try your MVP. These guys, they want a full solution. They want a product that can work for them. And then you've got the late majority and then the late laggards, okay? And the majority of the market, as you move into the marketplace, you'll find that the marketplace resides in this area of the early majority. And then you've got the late laggards, okay? Can someone please share with Mkheti our link, please? He wants to come in. All right. Now let's combine the Gartner hype cycle and also the product life cycle and the technology adoption life cycle. There is this chasm here where, for instance, although sometimes this graph is normally depicted as a continuous graph, but there is a big chasm here. And this chasm is basically the trough of disillusionment if you look at the Gartner peak curve, but it's also a chasm where startups die. I call this the startup valley of death. I'm going to get into it in a moment. I just want to explain these 5 stages of a product life cycle. Let's look at them individually. Who are the innovators? Just 2.5% of the market. These are the enthusiasts. They are not interested in seeing the product work. They just want to play with it. You know, they just want to play with it. And some of these people, they might be having an office somewhere in the company, but nobody listens too much to these guys. But then you have the early adopters. They are visionary. They are willing to try new things. Again, these people are still in the minority. I know for a fact, for instance, in the city of Johannesburg, there's an office called the Smart Cities Office. Yes, these people are trying to bring in technology, but the bigger departments within the city, they're not listening to these guys because they say, look, whatever that you want to try, show us first that it's going to work. And these are the people who are the early majority that we want to work with. And these early majority are the guys that are going to make things work for us. Okay. Now, the early majority, we call them the pragmatists. They just want to know that this thing works. They want to see the full solution, not just the MVPs. Whilst these guys will try the MVP, the guys in the early majority, they're not interested in your MVP. They want to try the whole product. They want to see the whole product work. Okay. Oh, and then you've got the conservatives. The conservatives, they still form a big chunk of the market, which is 34%. They're going to play a wait and see game. They say, yes, we can see the pragmatists have adopted, but hey, we're going to take our time. We're still not sure that this technology is proven. But then you've got the laggards who form like 16% of the market. These are the skeptics. They will not change unless they have no choice. Okay. I know of some of my friends, for instance, who are still not on WhatsApp for whatever reason, okay? And they are skeptical, and some of these people are not on social media, and they're like, they're just skeptical of just about every technology. And some of these people, with reasons, they are the ultra conservative, that you can say that they don't believe in anything new that is coming. Okay, and then These 16%, this first 16%, we call these the early market. Why we call these the early market? This is where you test your product. This is where you test your product before you cross the chasm and move into what we call the mainstream market. This is where you're going to grow your business. This is where you're going to achieve product market fit. Not here. Here you're going to test your hypothesis. You're going to test your hypothesis. You're going to test your MVP. But it's not going to happen until you move into the mainstream economy and into the mainstream market, where you now are selling to the pragmatists and the conservatives, and ultimately to the skeptics. These are the people. If you look at the cell phone industry back in 1995, when it came into this country, it started with the early innovators, okay? But because there were very few people with cell phones, you could go on days without your cell phone ringing, because it was just the early innovators and early majority and the early adopters. And these people were just like 16% of the market. But when in the beginning of the 2000s, we saw cell phone adoption moving into the early majority and even moving into the late majority, I don't think we still have the skeptics in the cell phone industry, because even the most skeptical, they now not only have a cell phone, but they have a smartphone. Okay, let's look into the lean startup stages, what Steve Blank calls the 4 steps of the epiphany, the great realization of forming a company. We know about these 4 steps. Okay, the first step is customer discovery. This is where you get into the whole idea of a problem solution fit. This is where you go and test your hypothesis. And once you clear off the hypothesis, then you build your MVP, and then you bring your MVP to the customer validation. This is where we've been stuck over the past, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, we've been getting out there and validating our customers, and we're validating our product. Okay, our MVP. However, some of you, I know, we have had to pivot. You have to go back because you are not getting anywhere. When you are not getting anywhere with your customer validation, it's all because your hypothesis, you probably didn't complete the validation, or you didn't test your hypothesis. You went out there with a hypothesis and say, hey, I know these customers might have this problem, but you didn't test it properly. So this cycle is got to happen. It's got to happen before you can even get into the stage. I think in the past 2 weeks, we've been working here, and I realized that we shouldn't be spending time here if everything has still not been sorted out here. So then you'll pivot and come back to customer validation. And then only when you've moved from here, you cross the chasm. When you cross the chasm, you go into customer creation. Customer creation, it's all about setting up your sales network, is setting up your marketing network. This is where now you move even to the point of building a company. When you build a company, obviously, you will have all the departments of building the company. But this will not happen until such time that you have achieved product market fit. When you cross over from customer validation to here, this is when you achieve product market fit. Now let's look at how this relates to the technology adoption landscape. The technology adoption landscape, as you know, the drone industry, there's been very little adoption. I mean, the fact that municipalities, it's only very few municipalities, even those municipalities are using it with very, very limited scope. But what we are saying here is that whilst you're working with the innovators here and the early adopters here, it's very, very important, because this market is going to take off, okay? And when it takes off, you need to have done all your work as far as the customer discovery and the customer validation, so that when these guys begin, the early majority begin to say, hey, maybe we should pay attention to this drone industry, because once they pay attention to this drone industry, then you'll be seeing all the municipalities, from left, right, and center, they'll be issuing out tenders to to be establishing their drone program. But at the moment, we must agree that our technology is still stuck with the innovators, and it's still stuck with the early adopters. Okay, we want to get into the early majority, but these are the guys we've got to convince, the guys who are in the early adopters. And until such time that we fully convince these guys form 13% of your market. And you need to move from here, because you need to use these guys. They're the ones who are going to do the referral going into the other space. These guys will do the referral for you to the early majority, and ultimately the late majority. Okay, let's move on. Now, the last topic that we want to talk about is crossing the chasm. Okay, now crossing the chasm of the drone industry is like crossing the chasm of just about any industry. Okay, now there's a book written by Jeffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm. Unfortunately, it's not available on Amazon, but you probably have to buy the book itself. If you can lay your hands on this book or look at the videos or whatever of Jeffrey Moore, this is basically transitioning from early to mainstream. The early market, which is the innovators and the early adopters, to the mainstream market. Okay. Now, the great chasm, as you can see, sometimes this product life cycle, it's sometimes depicted as something that is continuous. But I can assure you that this chasm is far bigger than it is presented here. Why I'm saying it's far bigger than it's presented here is because for a startup to move from from innovators and early adopters to the mainstream market, because this is the mainstream market, and the divide between the early market, which is basically you're selling to only 16%, to convince the other 84%. And in between here, this is the value of startup death. This is where you fail to validate your MVP. And when you fail to validate your MVP, then there's no product market fit. If you look at the Gartner curve, this is the trough of disillusionment. You know, this is where people get so frustrated and they leave. Instead of leaving, instead of going back to the drawing board and say, let's go back to customer discovery. Let us see if we are able to get into the customer discovery so that we can move from there and move into customer development. This is because until such time that you convince the early adopters, not so much the innovators. The innovators are open, okay? They are open book. They are open to any technology. But these are the guys, these guys are not going to be able to convince the early majority. It's only the early adopters who are very close to the early majority. But the early majority, they're not interested in your MVP. They want a fully fledged product. You must tell us how this product works, full support, training, and the full Monty. Okay, now, how do you cross this chasm? Okay, first of all, you got to understand the technology life cycle, the adoption life cycle. You got to understand where you are, and you got to understand the industry that you're in. You got to know where the drone industry is, because whether it's on the Gartner hype cycle, but you must understand that drone industry has not been adopted by the early majority. We are still tinkering around the innovators and the early adopters. You got to target and segment the market. Okay, sometimes I know Lufuno's target market is probably municipalities and the public safety departments in Gauteng. But maybe your market is all the metros, because they're the ones who have policing departments. You identified your problem, you've done that, but you need to go back and resegment the market and be niche in the problems that you want to solve. If Lufuno, the problem that you want to solve is basically a violent protest for the metro police departments, this is a niche that you got to go to relentlessly, because you can basically have a first mover advantage in this and drive that market right through into the early majority. You got to complete your customer discovery. I know we probably spend 4 weeks on customer discovery. Maybe we should have spent more time, okay? Because I've discovered some of you that when we're trying to do customer validation, that you still need to go back to customer discovery, which is not a problem. You got to pivot, got to keep pivot and go back until such time that you achieve what we call problem solution fit. You got to evaluate and be clear of their number one problem. And sometimes we are dealing with 3 or 4 customer problems, and we're trying to solve all of them at the same time. Maybe we need to pivot and just target one customer, as long as that problem meets all the 6 criteria, that the problem is frequent, is urgent, is growing, is costly, is mandatory, all of those pointers that we said about the customer problem. You got to know the current solutions and who's providing them. This is your competition. You got to know who's providing the current solution. If it's about violent protest, how are they solving it? We know that they're solving it probably using a chopper, which is quite expensive, and it's sometimes not available at all times. Okay, you got to reevaluate the problem solution fit. This now takes you back to customer discovery, which is something that you got to do. Okay, if all else fails, you go back to customer discovery. You got to go back to this part. Okay, in closing, these are my parting shots. The chasm is wider than you think. You might think that, hey, I'm closer to product market fit, but the chasm is probably far wider than you think. And the product market fit happens at any majority stage, and that is the mainstream market. It will not happen at the early adopter stage. Lastly, innovators and early adopters are your allies in the early stage. But to build a sustainable business, you need early majority and later the late majority. On this note, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to end here, and